In 1969, two countries went to war, and football started it. Not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech, actual war. Jets in the sky, soldiers crossing borders, thousands dead. All because of what happened in a stadium. But here's the thing, that's not even the craziest part of this story. Because football, the sport Americans call soccer, doesn't just start wars, it stops them. It unites countries that hate each other. It makes grown adults weep in the streets. It brings 1 billion people to a complete standstill at the same time, every 4 years. So today, we're asking the question nobody in the US is asking loudly enough. Why does the entire world stop for football? And what does FIFA, the organization that controls it all, actually have to do with that? This is the untold story of the beautiful game, and trust me, it's anything but beautiful. Let's set the scene. The year is 1904. 7 European countries, most of them colonial powers with more than a little blood on their hands, sit down in Paris and form a governing body for association football. They call it the Fédération Internationale de Football Association, FIFA. At that point, it's basically a small club, a gentleman's agreement between nations who figure they should probably have some consistent rules for this increasingly popular kicking game. Nobody in that room is thinking about the World Cup. Nobody is imagining billions of dollars. Nobody is picturing a moment in 2014 when 1 billion people watch a single match simultaneously. But here's the shocking part. FIFA today governs more member nations than the United Nations. Let that land. The UN, the organization meant to represent every country on Earth, has fewer members than a football association. As of right now, 211 nations are affiliated with FIFA. The UN has 193 member states. So when people in the US say soccer is just a foreign sport, I get it. The NFL is king here. The NBA is a global brand. Baseball is America's pastime. But in terms of raw global reach, nothing on earth touches football. Not even close. And here's what makes this interesting for us right now, in 2026. The World Cup is coming to the United States, Canada, Mexico. For the first time ever, America is going to be the host. And whether you care about football or not, you are going to feel it. But before we get to 2026, we have to understand how football got this kind of power in the first place. And that means going back to a war. A very short, very violent, very football-shaped war. Because the story of football's power doesn't start in a boardroom, it starts in a stadium in the middle of a riot. July 1969, Honduras versus El Salvador, World Cup qualifying. These two neighboring countries already had serious tension, land disputes, migration conflicts, economic pressure building for years. And then somebody decided, let's put them in a football stadium against each other and qualify for the World Cup. Game 1 in Honduras, El Salvador loses. Riots break out. A young Salvadoran woman, so reportedly overcome with grief, takes her own life. She becomes a martyr. Parades are held in her honor. Flags are draped over her coffin. Game 2 in El Salvador, Honduras loses. More riots. Honduran fans are attacked. The Honduran flag is reportedly burned and replaced. Honduras breaks off diplomatic relations. Then came the playoff, a neutral site. More violence in the stands. El Salvador wins, qualifies for the World Cup. 4 days later, Honduras and El Salvador are at war. The El Salvadoran Air Force launches airstrikes, ground troops cross the border, hundreds of civilians die, thousands are displaced. The conflict lasts 100 hours before the Organization of American States steps in to broker a ceasefire. Historians call it the football war or the soccer war, depending on where you're standing. Now, and this is critical, football didn't cause those underlying tensions. The land disputes were real. The economic inequality was real. Football was just the match that lit a powder keg that was already packed. But here's what that tells us. Football carries emotional weight that almost nothing else does. It absorbs national identity. It becomes a vessel for everything a population feels: pride, humiliation, rage, joy. No other sport does this at this scale. None. Fast forward 1 year, Mexico, 1970. Brazil has a team so magical that football journalists have literally run out of words to describe them. And in the center of it is a 29-year-old forward from a poor family in a small Brazilian town who grew up kicking rolled-up socks because his family couldn't afford a ball. Pelé. In a country where football was already a religion, Pelé wasn't just a player, he was proof. Proof that a black kid from nothing could become the most famous athlete on the planet. In a Brazil defined by inequality and racial tension, the 1970 World Cup wasn't just about football. It was about national identity, about dignity. Brazil wins that tournament playing a style of football so beautiful it still gets talked about as the greatest team in World Cup history. And when they win, the streets of Rio don't just celebrate, they transform. Strangers embrace, enemies forget their differences for one night. The entire country breathes as one. That's the thing people in the US sometimes miss about football. In most countries, the national team is not just a sports team, it is the country. When the national team plays, you're not watching a game, you're watching a question being answered. Who are we? What are we capable of? Are we worthy? And sometimes, the answer is devastating. July 8th, 2014, Belo Horizonte, Brazil. The World Cup semi-final, Brazil versus Germany. Brazil is the host nation. They've dedicated the tournament to their injured star. The entire country has been building to this moment for 4 years. The stadium is electric with belief. And then, Germany scores in the 11th minute, and the 23rd, and the 24th, and the 26th, and the 29th. 5 goals in 18 minutes. By half-time, it's 5-0. It ends 7-1. Brazilians call it the Mineirazo, a word for national trauma. Live television cameras showed grown men and women sobbing uncontrollably, not the polite cry of a disappointed fan, the kind of grief usually reserved for personal loss, for actual tragedy. One man was interviewed in the stands after the match. He said something that has been paraphrased and echoed across the internet ever since, that losing like this in your own country, in front of the world, felt like something being taken from your chest. A football result. That's what did that. Now, imagine you're an American sports fan. You love the Super Bowl. You understand what it feels like when your team loses a big game. But most of us have never experienced something like this, where a sporting result genuinely feels like a collective national wound. That's what football does. That's the power that FIFA controls. And that's why the organization that runs this sport, with all of its corruption scandals, its backroom deals, its Qatar controversies, still holds the single most valuable sporting property in human history. Because whatever you think about FIFA, and there is plenty to think about, the World Cup is not just a tournament, it is the biggest recurring human event on the planet. And in 2026, it's coming here. Are we ready for what that actually means? Here's my hot take, and I mean this. FIFA 2026 is not going to change how Americans feel about football. Not really. Not in the way UEFA and football evangelists keep promising. The "soccer is about to take over America" conversation has been happening since 1994. We keep waiting for the explosion. It keeps not fully arriving. But here's what I think actually happens in 2026, and this is the twist. America changes how the world feels about football. Think about it. The US is 60 cities worth of fans who have never experienced this tournament up close. That's 60 cities about to be filled with visiting supporters from Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, England, Germany, Nigeria, South Korea, nations where football is literally woven into cultural identity. The culture exchange is not going to be football converting Americans. It's going to be Americans experiencing something they've never felt before. What it's like when millions of people care about something this deeply, when the stakes feel this high, when the emotion is this raw. And something is going to break open in American sports culture. Because Americans lack passion, we are the most passionate sports fans on earth in our own arenas. We just haven't yet felt what football fans feel. And in 2026, on home soil, that gap is about to close faster than any league expansion or TV deal ever managed. The football war happened because two nations cared too much. The Minerazo happened because a country cared too much. And that level of caring, however dangerous, however extreme at its edges, is also the source of the most beautiful moments in human collective experience. FIFA controls something that governments can't manufacture and corporations can't fake. They control meaning. The World Cup means something. And whether you think the organization deserves that power or not, that meaning is real. It's felt by 1 billion people simultaneously. It is, arguably, the closest thing the human species has to a shared language. And in 2026, the US gets to be the sentence everyone is reading. That is not nothing. That is everything. That's it for today on Cold Kick Football. If this video hit different, and I think it did, hit that subscribe button right now, because we are building something here. Every week we're going deep on the stories behind football that American audiences have never been told properly. The scandals, the legends, the moments that stopped the world. Next week, we're going inside the story of how the US almost accidentally hosted the first World Cup ever, and why FIFA made a decision in the 1990s that changed American sports forever. And as we build towards 2026, we're covering everything. The host cities, the dark history of tournament bidding, the players you need to know before kickoff, and the reason this World Cup might be the most consequential sporting event in American history. Cold Kick Football. We cover the game the rest of America is sleeping on. Subscribe, leave a comment. Tell me, do you think 2026 changes American football culture for real this time, or is it another wave that crashes and fades? I'll see you next week.